cannot play.
Jojo, jaz sem Matej Petek, tokrat pa smo za vas pripravili, upam si trditi, pravo košarkarsko poslastico, vsaj za ljubitelje ne samo NBA košarke, temveč tudi evropske košarke in košarke nasploh. Pogovor z urednikom SB Nationovega Mavs Moneyball portala, Kirkom Hendersonom, ki ga na Twitterju lahko najdete pod @KirkSeriousFace. Tam piše in podcasta o NBA košarki že celo kopico let. V svojem podcastu je gostil že celo vrsto znanih ameriških novinarjev, ki na drugi strani Atlantika prav tako pišejo in govorijo o NBA košarki. Z njim sva pa spregovorila, seveda najprej o Luki Dončiću, potem pa še o vsem mogočem, kot bi rekel Blaž Bertalanič, ni da ni, o razlikah med razvojem igralcem v Evropi in Združenih državah Amerike, splošnih razlikah med evropsko in ameriško košarko, različnih percepcijah različnih igralcev na obeh straneh Atlantika, seveda tudi o različnih evropskih igralcih. Spregovorila sva o Giannisu Antetokounmpu in razliki med njegovo igro v NBA in za reprezentanco, tudi o Nikoli Jokiću, zanimiva debata. Na koncu pa še seveda o Dallas Mavericksih, njihovih pričakovanjih za to sezono in spremembi igre po poškodbi Dwighta Powella. Kaj sedaj to pomeni za Maverickse, bodo igrali bolj kot Rocketsi, bo Luka igral bolj kot Harden. In povsem na koncu še nekaj splošnih napovedi za sezono in mislim, da vas bo njegov odgovor, koga vidi v finalu, presenetil. Zato seveda, da ne bom zgubljal časa, bi vas samo na hitro zaprosil, da si vzamete tisto sekundo časa in stisnete tisti všeček, se naročite na naš Sportinfo.si YouTube kanal, če tega še niste storili, in če lahko enako storite tudi na naših SoundCloud in iTunes platformah, na vseh platformah lahko tudi pustite komentarje. Vse to nam pomaga več, kot veste, zato res, če si vzamete kakšno sekundico, bomo tega seveda zelo hvaležni. Zdaj pa ja, debata je bila super, mislim, da bo zanimiva za vse ljubitelje košarke, upam, da na obeh straneh Atlantika, zato ker gremo, veselo nedeljo. I'm joined today by Kirkom Hendersonom, the editor of Mavs Moneyball SB Nation site. He does a lot of great work there, writing and podcasting. I already told you, Kirk, I really enjoy your post-game rants after bad losses or disappointing losses. You really capture the misery of fans after bad losses in your post-game rants. And usually when Mavs have a bad loss, yours is the first pod I check.
I've gotten progressively worse as the season goes along when it comes to bad losses, because in the beginning I'm like, this is fine. And now, just because of the time of the season, every bad loss, I feel like the world is ending, so I just scream into the void, and you all happen to listen to it.
Yeah, I'm sure playoffs are going to be good if Mavs won't perform as well as we want them or expect them to. Also, the podcast, Mavs Moneyball podcast on iTunes, and Kirk, your enthusiasm, the best podcast title there is. I got to congratulate you on that. And let's just get into it, because we have a lot of things to cover and not a lot of time. So I sort of became aware of you when Luka was entering the 2018 draft, during the whole pre-draft process, when you were one of the few people, at least that I noticed on Twitter and social media in general, from US, of course, talking about Luka very early on and talking about wanting Mavs to draft Luka, talking about his potential. And I was actually quite surprised at that time by the amount of skepticism there was around Luka in US, of course, because in Europe it was quite the opposite. In Europe, I often say Luka was in a way our LeBron, in the sense of the amount of hype and expectations there were around him at the time. And in the US, it was quite the opposite. And not just when we're talking social media, but mainstream media too. People in the business, sort of, ex-players, front offices. There was a lot of doubt that in Europe didn't exist. We were mostly just talking about how good is Luka going to be, not if he's going to be good. We were talking about if Luka is going to be a top 25, top 20 player in the NBA, maybe a few-time All-Star in his career, or is he going to be a perennial All-NBA player and an MVP candidate? That was the range we were working with. And of course, when I went and sort of in depth in the media in US, how they were reporting about Luka and social media on Twitter especially, it was, like I said, quite the opposite. So I wanted to start with the question of what did you see in Luka when he was playing in EuroLeague and Eurobasket with his national team, and why did you see it? And a lot of other people, like I said, in the business who get paid a lot of money to see exactly that didn't.
You know, this is what I saw versus where basketball has been going for over a decade, all kind of plays together. So when the Mavericks got bad, when they missed out on a free agent class and ended up signing Harrison Barnes in the summer of 2016, that was when I fell deep into a component of social media that casually goes by draft Twitter. Now, there's a lot of guys over the last 3 to 5 years in draft Twitter. Cole Zwicker is one. Sam Vicini, who works for The Athletic, is another. Of guys who were basically men like you and me who spent a ton of time going through tape and watching games of all of these prospects. Because within the last, I would say, you know, as YouTube has exploded, there's just so much access to tape and to see what players are out there, what they're doing. You know, whole EuroLeague games, I think, are sometimes available online, even if they get taken down after copyright issues, where you can go and see players that, you know, 10 to 12 years ago, the general public wouldn't have had access to. So I started following these people who were really, really into the draft. And one of them is a good friend of mine. His handle on Twitter is Cosmis, Cosmis. Brian Schrader is his name. And he's just been a good friend of mine for like 15 years. And he simply told me that I need to start following Luka Dončić. And I can't remember Luka's age at the time. So if he's 21 now, he would have been 18 at the time. I think it was the year that he went, that the Thunder came over and played Real Madrid in the preseason. But this was before that.
Yeah, he was 16 at that time still.
And another writer he's transitioned in being a food critic, a guy by the name of Danny Chow, who writes for The Ringer, had been following Luka since he was 15 or so. And two people who I really liked and frankly had pretty good track records of selecting unique players, maybe not guys who had been at the top of the league, but guys who were at the very least very unique in skill set and talent combinations, said I needed to follow Luka. And so that resulted in me really doing my own deep dive into who was going to be available. And like any, basketball fan, particularly American basketball fan of the last 25 years, it is so easy to fall in love with the measurables of the various big men who are going to be available that draft. It's very interesting. Beyond Luka, the other guy that I was told to pay attention to was Jaren Jackson Jr., who was then playing at Michigan State, who ended up going fourth to the Memphis Grizzlies and is having a really under-the-radar but spectacular sophomore campaign. So I was looking at all these guys. Luka and Jaren were essentially on, I would say, the fringe top 7, top 8 heading into that particular calendar year. And the more I watched and the more I thought about how basketball has been played, particularly in the playoffs in the NBA, the last real big man to win a title as the big man on the best team was Dirk Nowitzki in 2011. And he played more of a perimeter-based game. So I did not want a big man the more I thought about it. So I hitched my wagon to Luka mainly because I thought he had an exceptional floor, meaning he would be a guy who, no matter what in the league, he was not going to bust because of the combination of size and overall basketball smarts, which the things that I could read and the things that I could see online, he was clearly a generational talent for European basketball. So why that wouldn't translate into American basketball really never made sense to me. So that was how I kind of hopped on the Luka bandwagon early. I berated Mavs fans about this because there are people.
I know.
And well, I mean, I was right, and I knew I was right because he's just like, I didn't think that what we experienced so far was going to be in the realm this early, but I knew he would be a spectacular rookie early on. It's just the way basketball is played now, and I thought if Rick Carlisle would give him a little bit of rope, he would be special. And it ended up we're all, people who have been on Luka bandwagon much longer than I had, could have predicted this, 6-7 years ago. He's that kind of special talent. So that was how I arrived on the bandwagon. Later than most worldwide, earlier than most in America.
Definitely, because in Europe, most of basketball fans were really aware of Luka, at least in the region, since he was maybe 13 at the latest, at least those who really follow basketball, but also wider. In the entire Europe, he had a 50-point triple-double at a tournament at age 13. And that's how he got to Real Madrid, how he got to transfer to Real Madrid. That performance for his local team in Ljubljana was what really sort of got him on the map. And that was already at 13. And a lot of basketball fans followed him pretty much since then on. And yeah, so far he hasn't disappointed. But you made a few interesting points, and I wanted to touch on the topic of development of players in US versus Europe, because maybe that speaks to the issue we're talking about, the sort of mistrust of American fans, or maybe even people in the business, towards European basketball, their way of developing players. I mean, the thing that really surprised me, the stereotypes, cliches about European players that I read and seen, not just again on social media, but in sort of in quotation marks, respected publication sites, mainstream media. And it was quite surprising. So is that connected to the way players are developed? And if you could talk a little bit about the way players are developed in US.
Well, Luka faced a little bit of an uphill battle just from a positional point of view, because at the time, no one could figure out if he was an off-ball player or a point guard, because the way he has been used, and at least, particularly on the Slovenian national team, and as well as, playing for Real Madrid, he's often succeeded with a secondary or even as a primary ball handler. He succeeded in both positions. So I think he faced a little bit of an uphill battle there, because whether he would be classified as a ball dominant guard or as an off-ball wing, there simply haven't been that many European bigger wings who have gone on to have outstanding careers. Now, guards, it's a little bit of a different position, because you have Drazen Petrovic?
Dražen Petrovic.
Yeah, you guys are gonna have to forgive me for my pronunciation.
No problem.
My son can say everyone's name correctly. He's 3. I cannot. And then you have, obviously, you have Goran, and there are a number of other examples of guards. So I think that was a little bit of a problem in terms of perception. As far as development goes, American basketball is very confusing to me. I have been arguing for the past 3 years or so that what's referred to here as the AAU shoe circuit of tournament and play is a insular, self-fulfilling prophecy of an organization where what happens is they select some of the best players that go to these traveling teams that then play unbelievable volume in games. And they play other top tier talent. And then essentially they get put on these ranking lists that don't change much between when these guys are, 2 years out of college or NBA basketball all the way to when they get drafted. So they're essentially a static list between 3 and 5 years out. A good example of this that you would be fairly easy to track is there is a player in this year's draft named James Wiseman. He played a few games at the University of Memphis before he was ruled ineligible. If you go and look at his various rankings throughout the years, he's always been a top 5 prospect. Well, on what planet is a big man going to be a top 5 prospect in today's NBA? There are maybe 5 post players, center type players in the NBA that are absolutely franchise worthy. Everyone else is a clear gap below. And so I see no reason to draft a guy that high when there are similar talent that are available on the free agency market or later in the draft. Anyways, you were asked about development. And so these guys don't, in my opinion, American basketball from a high school level is not great at skill development, because what happens is so many of these players end up just playing in games. I remember, I'm 30. When I was in the high school circuit, I played anywhere from 10 to 12 games on a weekend. We're talking like so much volume. And the thought was, and I understand it, I guess, is that the more you play, the more you're using your skills, the more you're figuring out what you're good at. But what I believe happens is guys get stuck in bad habits. They don't learn proper technique. They also, if they're on these really good teams or they're these really good players, they actually don't expand their skill sets much at all, which results in certain guys kind of plateauing. You and I have talked in the past, and I used a really good example of who I believe is Dennis Smith Jr., former Maverick, current Knick. He missed a huge chunk of his development due to the fact that first he was injured, then he went to a bad college program. So when he was 14, 15, 16, he showed real potential and then absolutely plateaued because he simply didn't get better at any skill. And that's really one of the main problems that I see with American basketball. Now, there's such a volume of players that eventually you get guys that break through the mold. Jason Tatum is a really good example. There seemed to be the 2021 draft seems to be a little bit of resurgence in American talent after a gap from maybe 2017 to now, frankly, where there's not been a ton of top tier talent at the top as far as the NBA and professional draft prospects are concerned. Did I answer your question? Because it was kind of a big question.
They're all going to be probably, at least in our first spot, and I hope you'll be able to join me again, so we'll go more in depth. But to continue sort of that discussion, how is the way we develop players here in Europe looked at in US? Because that sort of probably speaks to some of the reasons why Luka didn't go as high. If he had played in US, if he gone through the whole system, AAU basketball, played in college, he probably would have been drafted higher. Even if he was like an international player who just moved. There are many examples. Ayton, in his draft, he moved to US when he was, 14, 15. So if Luka did that, and if he'd gone through the whole system in US, would he have been drafted higher?
I think he might have stood a chance. I'm really not sure. I think the European, particularly his club's model for developing him was really effective because his talent broke through repeatedly. If I understand his history over here, I'm not sure he would have had a chance to develop some of the skills in the proper way. That has been my biggest beef with American basketball. Now, I am speaking purely from an opinion point of view. I'm not necessarily correct, but you would assume, based on the volume of people that play basketball here compared to, say, your country, that people would have better skills. One of the things you and I have kind of jokingly laughed about the last several days is how bad Americans are at shooting the basketball relative to the number of players who play here. And so I wonder if Luka had gone through any sort of American development system, if he would have ended up how he was, maybe he would have. Sometimes with guys, real talent just shines through in the end, no matter how bad. Kevin Durant's a really good example of this. He went to one of the worst college basketball programs in the country and, worked himself into being the number 2 overall pick. It's very, sometimes talent just shines through, but I think with the second and third tier, essentially your guys who are non-superstars but are still NBA players, I just feel that the European system has got to be better at developing players.
Mark Cuban also commented on that. I think he said something like that probably American prospects would benefit from going to a European club system, academy system, and spend all their time just working on their skills, working on basketball. That's a big difference. I often hear players in US have to go to school as well. Many academies, at least the biggest academies, Real Madrid Academy, they actually have their school, sort of it's a campus in a way, but with the priority being sports and development of basketball skills, not education as probably is in US.
I mean, the American college system is a little bit of a sham. 30, 40 years ago, it made more sense, but I can't remember the number of the top division for American college basketball. There's something like 400 teams. 30 guys get drafted in the first round every year, 30 in the second round. There's only 60 available professional slots in the NBA. And I know there's a number of European clubs that end up picking up college guys every year, but most people who play college basketball in the United States do so because they like it and they want to do something and just continue to play basketball at a high level. The really good colleges are essentially, I hate to be this blunt about it, but they're essentially fronts for basketball organizations. People that go to these colleges like Duke, they don't actually, they go to some classes, maybe the guys in the back end of the bench do. But like Zion Williamson was in class, he was at Duke for 7 months and then he was going to become a professional athlete. I bet he didn't, class and that sort of stuff is definitely secondary, which the model was designed to put education first, but there's so much money in college basketball and college sports in the United States that it's just become a big business.
And it's a shame that players don't get paid. And it's going to be interesting to see if more American prospects might take the route of maybe LaMelo Ball, who went to Australia this season. Years ago, I think Jennings went to Europe before draft. But those cases are still extremely rare. And it's going to be interesting to see whether maybe some more American prospects go abroad before they go to the draft, or, which is probably more likely, the NCAA system will change and maybe start paying players, which I always hear is a big topic around college sports in general.
Yeah. And, one of the issues that the NBA has in terms of drafting is, and this really circles back to the conversation about Luka and how he slipped to 5. I am a little concerned and confused about how many players are put in these mock drafts and basically assigned a value despite their production. There's a player right now at the University of Georgia named Anthony Edwards who is kind of considered a consensus top 10 pick, and yet he can barely hit a three-pointer. He's shooting, almost about 30% from 3. He doesn't really pass the ball that well. He doesn't really rebound the ball that well. There's an emphasis in the United States on intangible things like wingspan and height and really projection out over what guys do production-wise. And sometimes it makes sense because when you see a guy like, we'll go way back, Kevin Garnett. When Kevin Garnett went 5th overall, he was the best player in that draft, and he should have gone higher. And what happens is over years you get these these more measurement-based things that take priority over actual production. And NBA teams in their arrogance think that they can correct things, essentially teach a guy to play basketball by the time they get to the NBA. Well, as you and I have mentioned, it's the most important developmental cycle as far as I'm concerned is when a player is, 13, 14, 15 up until about age 22. After, when you're in your early 20s, if you haven't developed a shot by then, the likelihood of you ever developing a shot it just goes way down. You've had the time, you've had the practice. And for Luka to slip in the draft was an example of all these GMs having almost too much time, too much access to tape, and were being worried about things despite what was right in front of them. And you're going to see that again this year. There's another player named Cole Anthony who plays for the University of North Carolina who is shooting something like 30% from the field, not three-point line, like from the field. And he's going to be a top 10 pick, and that doesn't make sense to me. If you're 19 years old and you're playing against mediocre competition and you're unable to hit shots, that's not going to get better when you go to the NBA. That's what made Luka's trajectory so obvious to me, because every time he moved up, he played better.
Yeah, he made a considerable jump every season. And I wanted to ask you, didn't step change anything? Because maybe, I'm not going to say the best player, but maybe there was a season or two where he was the best player in the NBA and arguably the best shooter ever, maybe not even arguably. Didn't go through this AAU system and all of this. So didn't he change the perception of GMs, people in the business, scouts, of the value of skills, of the value of shooting?
You think he should, but judging by what we keep seeing in drafts, I just don't see how. Now, talent comes in waves, and the way basketball has always been, particularly in the NBA, there is a clear... you look at the All-Star game's a pretty good example of this, but even within the All-Star game, you can see that there are 10 to 12 to 15 guys who are significantly better in a kind of just in abstract than other guys. So when it comes to draft-related stuff, production, you'd think that production would get valued properly at a certain point, and it just isn't. NBA GMs and front offices are just so married to intangibles because they don't want to miss on the guy who just needs the right situation. And I guess I understand why, but there have been, it's pretty incredible. The 2018 draft is one of the best in the last probably 15 to 20 years. And still, they missed on the top two players by a wide margin, because I still consider Luka and Jaren Jackson the best two players. And then there's Trey, I guess, who would probably be third. And again, those guys were not, none of those, those were the third, fourth, and fifth picks, not the top two. It's just, it's very confusing, because the NBA and front offices, and I'm sure you see this in European clubs, in that there are often, you assume these people are often the best of the best of the best in terms of being in their job. And that's simply not the case. A lot of NBA teams are really run like small businesses, where they have, very small groups of scouts and GMs, and people are so concerned about making the wrong move that sometimes they overthink things, which is how we get into these positions where a guy slips and falls in the draft, and where the obvious pick goes fifth instead of first.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that in this 2018 draft, and I completely agree with you, it looked like it's going to be a great draft, and so far it's looking even better. It truly is an amazing draft, and it's a lot of fun following all of those talents. But it's interesting to see that besides Luka, the other most skilled, arguably the most skilled player in the draft, Trey, just like Luka, slipped in the draft. And I have to say, when I was watching, from my perspective, when I was watching Trey playing in the NCAA for Oklahoma, I actually had him second, and I also love Jaren Jackson. I had him third, but I had Luka as number 1 and Trae as number 2, exactly because they were the most skilled players. They could shoot, they could pass, both had incredible vision, which is really important. And when you have that vision and you have that passing skill and you can shoot too, it's almost like in today's NBA, you almost can't miss. I mean, it's almost impossible to miss.
Right.
Well, then let's just move on. We were also talking about just in the past few days about Giannis, about different international players. Maybe I'd like to expand it because from our perspective, Giannis and Jokić are two of, besides Luka, two of the more exciting international talents, or the most actually. Probably it's Giannis, Jokić, and Luka, or am I missing somebody? Or
no, that'd be my 3.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, there are
maybe
other...
Rudy, but I just don't care for defense.
Is Rudy still under 25? I
guess he's not. No, you're right. He's 27.
Rudy was somebody who maybe like in NBA they didn't expect he's going to be this good, this sort of a defensive presence. Yeah. But he's another great international player. But I wanted to talk some Giannis, which you, I know you're a huge Giannis fan. Well, we all are. Yep. We're all Giannis fans. But his perception in Europe because of his national team performances is a little bit different than probably in NBA. He underperformed in the last World Cup. After becoming the MVP of NBA League, he averaged something like 14 points, 8 rebounds in the World Cup, shooting something like 22% from 3. And I was wondering, let's just start here. What do you think about Giannis? Is he the sort of a player who can lead an NBA team to the title?
I do. I really think he's the most scary player since LeBron, and before that, it was Shaq. There's a physical component to his game paired with, and this is really the most important part, the way the rules are and the way fouling is called within the NBA. Giannis is arguably the perfect player right now for how the NBA is set up. And the defensive 3-second rule is easily one of the biggest, he's one of the biggest beneficiaries, because when they run these high screen and rolls and when he's attacking the basket, you just can't, that weak side defender has to make a choice when coming. He can't just camp out in the lane and clog it up, which results in, which results in basically all these big.
It's going to be Luka.
It's going to be, Luka does the same stuff, but I think he's got better mid-range touch.
I mean, he's going to be passing to Luka because
maybe so. And so what I think he's just so good at getting to the rim and both dishing and absorbing contact, because when he gets to the lane, there's only one other guy there. And I think that this is where coaching and where basketball philosophy plays such a big role. I don't remember FIBA rules exactly, but I think you can play, a little more freely in the zone defense.
There is no 3 seconds in FIBA, no defensive 3 seconds, so you can have bigs camping in the paint all possession.
So you pair that with and I don't know anything about Greece's coach, but I've seen enough in the NBA over the years where you get these coaches that want to do things extremely specifically, regardless of the talent that they have on the roster. Because what I think happened enough with Greece is that they played Giannis more like a forward rather than a guard. And that is just, where you play kind of an egalitarian, equal system where you get guys involved and you move the ball. And, as much as some people don't like watching a player like James Harden, it's hard to argue with the results of giving your best player the ball and telling them to go to work. Now, I think that eventually the league may want to look at some rule changes to prevent this kind of high usage from certain players, just so that the ball will move a little more. But I think a guy like Giannis is just the perfect NBA player at this point in time. I mean, he's so big, he's so strong, he's developing every year. His 3-point shot's not there, but he's shooting like 31%. And I mean, heck, Luka's shooting 32.5%. And that threat of a shot is so valuable to being able to attract defensive attention.
Would you, because that's what we were talking about on Twitter, I wonder, would you take Giannis before a healthy KD?
Ooh, man. KD might have been my second favorite player behind Dirk Nowitzki before Luka came in. I would love to see KD play the way Giannis plays. I don't think it's in his nature. He really does want to do a lot of one-on-one stuff. But I view, and I argue about this with a lot of people over here in America, I view intent, how a guy wants to play, as important as anything else. And what I mean by that is James Harden might be averaging a ton of assists. James Harden doesn't want to pass the ball. James Harden wants to shoot the ball. Luka Dončić might be averaging 29 or 29 points, but Luka wants to pass. Luka wants to pass first. I really, truly believe that. And I think that ends up being the difference and Giannis is a guy who probably splits that difference just enough, which makes him really hard to defend. And that's kind of where I am at the moment with that sort of thing.
So basically, I mean, you value passing over shooting, but let me just sort of reverse the question. What do you think is worse for the way NBA basketball is played now? A player who doesn't pass or is a bad passer, has bad vision, or just not a willing passer, or a player who can't shoot? And maybe in the context of playoffs. In the context of playoffs.
I think I have to say it's got to be shooting, because we've all witnessed these games where no one can hit, and that's almost unwatchable. Where you go through these, the Rockets had one of these games against the Warriors, I think 2 years ago, where they went something like 0 for 27 from the field at one point from long point or from 3-point distance. And so the inability to shoot is really what ends up separating a lot of good from great players in the NBA. And I still, as much as I personally like and value passing, the ability to shoot, I think, ends up being the most important skill.
So it's got to be KD over Giannis.
Yeah, I really think so, because KD is a unreasonable, he's a Frankenstein of Dirk Nowitzki, Tracy McGrady, and Kevin Garnett. I mean, if LeBron hadn't existed as this incredible Hulk style basketball player who, has eventually become a very good shooter compared to how good that he was, KD would be an all-timer conversation. We'd be talking about him the way we talk about Jordan, I think, with how good Kevin Durant is at basketball. But he's a different guy. He's also very emotional outwardly, and I think he bears some baggage where 25 years from now, I think we'll be talking about Kevin Durant as one of the best ever in a way that he's not talked about right now, because I think he annoys people.
Well, absolutely. I completely agree. And maybe when I talk to basketball fans, not just in Slovenia, but around Europe, I get the perception that KD might be, I think I can say that KD is more popular than LeBron, at least in Europe. As a basketball player, in a way, I have that sort of a feeling just from talking with friends. But I wanted to ask you about some other international players, but let's move to Mavs basketball and maybe hit a few general NBA points too, so we don't run out of time. One of the things we've already talked about, and a lot of Mavs fans have talked about lately, is how Mavs game has changed after Powell's injury, with Kristaps moving to 5 on defense and offense, becoming sort of the big, but not really. We all know KP is sort of a wing in centers, not even in the center's body, but with the height of a center, with a freakish height. right, because if he had the body, he could bang more. But he's a different player, and Mavs are playing differently. Like one of the things, at least again in Europe, a lot of European basketball fans, especially those who watch a lot of EuroLeague, I see a lot of complaints on social media about the way Harden plays, about the way Rockets plays, ISO heavy game, just switching and ISOing and then attacking, a lot of not a lot of ball movement. Euro fans like two things, and that's why NBA fans are sort of arguing a lot with Euro fans. Euro fans in basketball usually like defense and ball movement. So sort of Houston Rockets are the antithesis of that. And one of the fears I read on boards, a lot of fans here have like, are Mavs going to play more like Rockets now? Is Luka going to ISO more? He played pick and roll on almost 50% of his possessions before Powell's injury. And ISO, the number was sort of around 10%. Is that going to change now? What do you think about all of that, Kirk?
This is a really tough question because if you look, two things happen. So I would argue that the best Dallas played all year as a team was they played in Mexico City against Detroit and absolutely annihilated the Detroit Pistons. The next game was when Luka sprained his ankle against the Miami Heat. And then from basically then until the end of Fed, and really, I mean, over the Mavs have more or less played 500 basketball since. Now, they played 500 basketball not only because they were dealing with injuries, they also played their much tougher teams over the last 30 or so games. It's just a better quality of opponent. And so when you run into the fact that you're not playing with your best units and then you're playing against better teams, things are really going to muck up. I'm very curious to see how things stay different without Powell. I valued Powell. How about this? I trusted the numbers despite really not liking watching Dwight Powell play basketball.
Yeah, I didn't get the Powell hate on Mavs Twitter. That was one of the weirdest sort of things to me. Like, are we watching the same game?
I mean, he does. He's so bad. He was so bad on defense. And
yeah. I'm talking offense. I'm talking his screens, rolls.
It was obvious, though, because providing that element of, and this is just clear based on how our fans have reacted, Mavs fans do not have a big enough appreciation for timing in offense, because the ability to, one, throw the lob, which is what Luka was doing, and then two, catch and dunk the lob or lay the lob in, is really underrated by NBA fans. We're really spoiled by athleticism. But that element of the offense being gone has really caused some problems, despite the fact that the offensive rating looks pretty good. I do think that over the last 10 to 12 games, Porzingis really started to play with more force. I can't really explain that other than to say I thought he was moving at the basket with more of a purpose. He was avoiding contact less, and he was being more decisive when he would get the ball. And while I do think that the Mavericks will play a little more ISO heavy, I think Porzingis playing with more confidence is going to open things up for Luka in a way that his shooting, or really his threat to shoot, was doing previously. I personally believe they need to run more high pick and rolls with Porzingis. But the thing is, and this is a really dirty secret for casual fans that have no idea about this, but I bet hardcore European fans see this and scream. No one in the NBA can set a screen. No one. And that includes Luka, to be quite honest with you. Everyone
Adams is a good screener.
I mean, Powell was a good screener.
Great. By NBA standards. Yeah, absolutely.
And his timing was good. All KP wants to do is slip the screen. But if they can get into his head that if he just holds that screen a little more, and if Luka will come off those screens at a slightly different angle, sometimes he uses it just mainly as a going through the motions bit. I think that the Mavericks still have a chance to really find new elements of their offense. I really miss, just seeing those easy. Luka's assists are going to continue to drop, because he was getting 2 to 3 easy assists to Powell a game, and those just aren't there anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. The timing that you talked about is crucial here. And also, I mean, I see a lot of talk about how KP has to sort of adapt to Luka, but it works both ways. Luka has to adapt, sacrifice some of his game for KP too, probably for both to succeed. And maybe it's not just like, maybe the next level is not to use him as a center on offense, as a big on offense, but like run just more wing sort of plays for him. Maybe that's how he can be more productive offensively, not just increase the pick and roll, because even in Europe, when I watched him, like in Eurobasket, I just recently watched back a few games of KP playing in Eurobasket. That was in 2017, right when he became All-Star the next season, and then of course tore his knee like in January, I think, or beginning of February. But that was probably peak KP at Eurobasket 2017, and the beginning of the season with the Knicks then. And I mean, at least in Eurobasket, he was like killing Slovenia, killing us in that game, basically just by shooting, by running off screens and stuff like that. I mean, that's where he really is pretty much unstoppable, the biggest mismatch probably.
Well, and his shot, I complained about this all year long. Porzingis' shot, anybody that compared him to Dirk as a shooter needs to go reassess their judgment skills, because Dirk has one of the most unique shot forms. It's very slow. It's methodical. Porzingis is like a pistol. Like he gets that ball ready and fires it, but he also was shooting with so little arc that the ball would come off the rim, and it was almost as bad as a turnover in some respects, because you know those really bad shooters who just – I always laugh at this when a guy who shoots a corner three and it hits off the front of the rim, that's as bad as a turnover because the ball's going the other direction. And Porzingis kind of did that a lot. And the fact that he's just developed a little more consistency, and all of us, myself included, anybody, it's so – you see these guys shoot in practice and they're so good at it, and it's wondering why it doesn't translate to a game. And, when you miss this much time as he did, being off with his knee injury, I suppose it's probably smart to look at this year almost entirely as a year of assessment. And if he explodes next year, if he comes up down the stretch, that's really just a bonus, because this year was about relearning how to play basketball for Porzingis.
Absolutely, and there are many examples of guys needing. Paul George is a good example, needing an entire season to get back after a tough injury, especially after they've been out for so long. And I think that a lot of fans sometimes forget that he might need a whole season, and we will probably see the real KP next season. But to touch on that pick and roll topic a bit more, Carlisle always employed a dive man in his lineups, a vertical sort of threat in his lineups. But also, on the other hand, Luka in Europe, the way we saw him win titles, at least the title with Real, I called him a pick and roll Mozart a long time ago. He's like, the way he maneuvers pick and roll is like, it's my favorite thing to watch with Luka. The way he operates in the pick and roll, the way he sees the floor in pick and roll is just something that's probably extremely unique. And when I was doing comparisons before the draft, of course, writing, I often talked about guys like LeBron and Magic too, and of course then got pronounced as a crazy Luka stan who doesn't know anything except loves Luka. But the vision he has and the height, the combination is something really truly tremendous to watch, and that's how he won titles so far. Basically, that was the main thing, the main thread, where everything sort of the alpha and omega, where everything started and stopped in offense with Luka. So do you think Mavs need a dive man? The center issue.
Yes. I think it needs to be KP more off, at least more than it has been. I don't know if we consider this year a bonus. They're going to make the playoffs. They're going to be a 6-7 seed, I think. I think that'll expose itself in the playoffs, just because Luka is working way too hard to score the baskets that he's scoring. The dive man really helps with that. I think they should use him off ball more. That's a different discussion. Yeah. But I do think they need a dive man. I have, over the last 12 hours, I have bizarrely fallen in love with the idea of Aaron Gordon of the Magic coming to the Mavericks next year somehow. He's a miscast 3 that is essentially a modern 4 who does. He's a shorter, better version of the things that Powell is supposed to be great at.
Yeah, Aaron Gordon would be absolutely great. I mean, watching just like Luka playing a little bit in the All-Star, just with Simmons on a few possessions. I mean, I think Simmons is in many ways the same. I mean, he's a miscast 4. I mean, if Sixers would have used Simmons like maybe Heat are using Bam Adebayo, they're not entirely similar players.
Great
but
comp.
Yeah.
In terms of usage, that's an unbelievably good comparison because Ben Simmons thinks he needs the ball all the time and I get it. I guess he's good in half court, but if you're using him as the roll man, the way that Golden State used Draymond Green during their absolute heyday, offensively, you become a juggernaut. It's just, guys like that would be, I mean, look, I can't even think about that. Luka playing with Ben Simmons as a high roll man. They'd have 125 offensive rating and be a riot.
Or my dream, which will never happen because Heat will never let him go, Bam Adebayo. I have to say, like, this season, he's my top 3 favorite players to watch. I mean, Bam is just ideal modern NBA small ball big, not even a small ball big. I mean, like, he's a tremendous player. If he gets a little bit of a shot, and in skills challenge, I mean, he beat Domantas Sabonis when he had to shoot the 3, and if he ever gets a little bit, he doesn't need, I mean, he can shoot a little bit from mid-range, but tremendous player, but yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just move on to NBA. Maybe I'll just ask you like the most basic question. Who do you see in the finals? Who do you see winning both conferences? And, of course, then who do you see winning the finals?
Milwaukee out of the East, and it's not close. Anybody that says otherwise believes in fairy tales and, unicorns and stuff like that. They're just too good. I do think their main issue would probably be their coach, who gets in their way a lot. If you look at what Giannis is doing on a per minute basis, if they play him 38 minutes instead of 36, they're going to be unstoppable. It's really that basic. Out of the West, it's going to be really curious. I don't think the Lakers are built for long-term success. The fact that they've been getting away with Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee as a center combo, from a health perspective, let alone production, is really quite incredible because both of those guys are older and have injury issues. And I just can't believe they're going to withstand 25 more regular season games and then 20-ish games in the playoffs to get all the way to the finals. If they get there, it wouldn't shock me, but they're not my favorite. I still love Denver. The way they play, one of the things I told one of my good friends named Adam Mares, who works for a site, DNVR, they cover a lot of Denver sports. Denver got started off the year poorly, to say the least, because Jokić was out of shape coming after the overseas play, and he was just kind of grouchy. Because I don't think basketball is certainly not his first love. It's horse racing and basically probably eat. Yeah, he's a hefty man, eating, enjoying life, whatever we want to call it.
He just said he lost 25 pounds since the start of the season. Just posted that today.
That's incredible. And
25.
He's so the fact that they're playing how they're playing now. I see them as one of these teams that you want to. The problem with the NBA season being so long is you don't want to have what happened to the 2007 Mavericks. The 2007 Mavericks started 0-4, and then, I kid you not, went on a 52-4 run. They won 52 games and lost 4 times. But then they essentially ran into a little bit of a hitch, where as a team they started playing poorly. And by the time they entered the playoffs, they just weren't where they were previously during their winning stretch, and they got knocked out of the first round by Golden State. I see Denver as a team that is building momentum in a way that will be very helpful to them towards playing time or towards playoff time. It seems a little, hokey and almost based off of a narrative, but I just like Denver. I don't care for the Clippers, despite Kawhi Leonard being the Terminator and just a cyborg. It wouldn't shock me if they get there too, but the NBA season's too long to have this many kind of weird problems.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative seems to be that it's pretty much a done deal for the Clippers, or at least that's the feel I get. I mean, most media, at least after the last trades. But Denver is, I think it's an interesting sleeper sort of in the playoffs. We need to watch. And it could be, I mean, it might not be a done deal, Lakers, Clippers in the finals, like most seem to think. It would be interesting to see, although for fans in Europe, probably Clippers, Lakers, just general NBA fans of basketball around the world, they probably all want to see LA finals, but that's another topic. Kirk, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk to me. I know how precious time is to all of us who are doing this stuff for mostly for pleasure, but also for other stuff. And I mean, usually I like to say that for me, sleep is as precious as the ring was to Gollum, and I'm sure it's the same with you. So I really appreciate it. Taking
Absolutely. Let's. I know we got more stuff we want to hit on. So let's talk again in March or in early April.
We definitely will. I'll take you up on that word. And thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
No problem. You have a good night.
You too. Bye.